Hello, internet and tabletop communities. Welcome to Steven Recommends, the show where we talk about various games that you may not have heard of and well, though probably should be playing because they are fun and they are good. With me tonight is my two co-hosts, Aaron from Table Knights Entertainment, who who are giving me this wonderful show and hosting it for me. They would like me to mention to please donate to Child's Play. And my other co-host here is John. So tonight we're going to be talking about in the spirit of Halloween, we're going to be talking about two systems. We have Dread and Don't Rest Your Head. Both of these are very good. Uh, both these are very good indie horror systems. Very rules light, very simple, and very scary, or very interesting, depending on what you want, which one you're playing, and what you want out of them. So the first one we're going to be talking about is Dread. Now, I just want you to take a look at this book real quick. I mean, seriously, this thing is gorgeous. It's just, a straight white book with a bloody handprint on it. That's all
Very
it is.
clean.
And it's really, really effective. I mean, and you may or may not have heard of this system. Whenever I hear about it from people, it's always in these sort of whispered hush tones of that one game that they played on Halloween that someone brought out that everyone always remembers, though, is that A, it's terrifying, and B, it's played with a Jenga tower. All you really need to play this game is a Jenga tower. And not even really the book. You can play this with a Jenga tower, but the book is very helpful. So the way this game works is you have a Jenga tower. There is no dice, there's no character sheets, there's no stats, and no numbers whatsoever. All it is you, your other players, and the GM, and a Jenga tower. Every time you want to do something that's outside of your realm of expertise, you gotta pull a block from the Jenga tower and place on top. Basically playing Jenga. However, the consequences of the tower falling are much more dire. As soon as the tower falls, whoever knocked the tower over is going to die. There is no saves, no second chances, no coming back as anything other than some sort of enemy. You are gone, you are dead, and you are done. Now, this may seem very brutal, but it's also very effective at making it very tense and scary. As the Jenga tower starts thinning out with blocks, it starts getting much more and more intense because every block could be your last pull, and it's just a great way of building tension and terror in a game. Now, of course, because it's such a lethal system, and just knocking the tower over is going to kill people, everyone's probably going to die during the gameplay, making it not really good for anything outside of one shots. But for those one shots, they're really, really good and memorable. Now, why should you buy this book? This book, like I said, you don't really even need the book to play because it's just a Jenga tower. There's no stats, there's no character sheets. So what do you need the book for? A good thing that the book is for is the way you make a character is not by, generating stats or coming up with anything like that. The GM writes up questionnaires on sheets for the players that the players will answer themselves. So you do make your character, but you make who they are as opposed to what they can do. And it's very important that the GM makes these character sheets with the adventure that they have in mind for the players. So making these, so the book is really good at sort of helping you out with making these guiding questionnaires for characters. Now, the other thing it's really good for is it's just generally a really good resource if you want to run horror games because it has just methods and on storytelling for various types of games. Suspense games, supernatural games, madness games, moral games, mysterious games, gory games, everything you could want from horror. It's got very good suggestions on storytelling for these sorts of games. So it's a very good just horror resource in general. On top of that, it comes with 3 ready-to-go stories in the back of the book, varying from sci-fi to back to like out in the middle of nowheresville to the classic slasher film. Each adventure comes with a set of already made questionnaires for people to make characters with, and are really just good jumping on points for a good game for starting to run Dread. Now, like I said, this is basically good for one shots, and you really have to play it in person. You can't really play it online because you do need a Jenga tower, and part of that intensity is the physical aspect of a Jenga tower, and like your own manual dexterity determines whether you live or die. So yeah, it's definitely a very good book if you can find it. It's a little hard to find sometimes because they have printings of it. I was lucky enough to snag a copy because they had a printing relatively recently. You can also pick up the book on Drive-Thru RPG for relatively cheap. I think it's maybe around like $15-20. It's definitely worth grabbing if you're really into that sort of like fraying nerves sort of horror. We'll have a link for both of these systems in the description of the video. So, John, Aaron, you got anything to contribute?
Yeah, I have to say that using the manual dexterity system, that was just like something that I would never have thought of on my own. It's just so out of the blue, and it may not sound super difficult when you're describing it, but if you're in that moment, it becomes a lot more apparent just how difficult pulling a block from a Jenga tower can be. And you see the Jenga pieces getting pulled out after each action, and you know that the next action you're going to take is going to be fucked because all these little pieces are missing. And you try to find the best piece, and sometimes people will sit there, and take their time trying to pull a piece, but I think it mentions this in the book. It might, or it might not. You should put a timer, and if they don't, consider the tower to have fallen.
Yeah. I mean, another thing is that you don't have to pull just one. Sometimes if you want your character to do better at something, or they need to like be better than just simply getting by, you can make them pull. You can pull two or more blocks to get a better result from your pulling. But this is like just flirting with disaster, and you're probably going to die at some point if you keep doing it too much. Like I've had one GM. Like when I first played this, my wife ran it, and she basically just like had us constantly pulling blocks just to do various things, and we were just like, it was so utterly intense. Like we just dropped like flies during that game. I mean, another thing to note is, even if it's not your turn, if you care at all about the rest of your party members, because it still is a party game sometimes, it's so intense, even when it's not your turn. You just watch them when you're like, oh no, don't topple the tower. Don't topple it. It's just so nerve-wracking and it's intense. Every moment of the game is going to be intense until that tower just falls over and you release the tension, someone's dead, and you set it up again and keep going.
A lot like good sex, there's a lot of build-up. Ba-da-ba-ba-da-ba.
For about 20 seconds of relief.
John, speak your mind, my friend.
So it immediately strikes me as a good party game. Like, I haven't played tabletops in person for a year, and that's weird.
That's sad.
I know. I've been playing a lot of Roll20, so it's a good game for, like, you have people over at a party, and you're just like, hey, we're gonna play this. We're gonna play this now.
Who wants to play Jenga, but you'll die 5 years sooner?
And so that's the main advantage I see, is that it's tailored for maybe one session, maybe two, but largely just a party game. Like, if you have friends over and you're 2 or 3 drinks in and you can't agree on a Netflix situation, it's time to crack this game out.
It's easy to set up, easy to get going, and it's also I think I mean, like, it's good for any time, but I think it's best for just pulling out during October because it's just so fitting with that Halloween time of just
Yeah.
horror and terror and other things like that. It is built for Halloween, for just Halloween one shots. It is a great system for that.
All right, so next system.
So yeah, that was just a short one. This is going to be the bulk. This next one's going to be the bulk of our discussion tonight. Don't rest your head. Yes, this game. Yeah, it's a very small book, as you can see, pretty thin, but contained within it is probably one of the best settings, the best ideas, and probably the one of the most terrifying and psychologically horrifying systems I've ever come across. Now, Don't Rest Your Head is about insomniacs. The whole idea is that you are a person who's known as an awake. You have a problem. As in the most simple terms, you have a problem. Now, this problem is such a severe problem that you have not been able to sleep for a long time. So long, in fact, that you've forgotten how to sleep. You just you just have reached that moment of clarity of like, I can't sleep, I'm never going to be able to sleep, and I don't even know how to sleep anymore, and I'm like have become more awake because of it. It's like one you've gone over that hill. So you've been having insomnia for like weeks or months on end, and now you've like become suddenly aware of things. Now the idea is this has now given you access to a place called the Mad City. The Mad City, the way I like to think of it is this system is sort of like Silent Hill, the tabletop game. The Mad City is a place where things just aren't quite right. I mean, there are familiar things like streets, buildings, other things, but the buildings aren't quite right. The people aren't quite right. The buildings go in that odd angle, or sometimes go up halfway and then twist inside out in MC Escher style. The people there are all just sort of like the NPCs from a video game RPG. Like the best way I've heard the denizens of the Mad City described is, that guy whose entire purpose in an RPG is just to sit at the bar and when talked to, just say, "Times are tough." That's every denizen of the Mad City except the worst part that you're trying to avoid because they are after you because all awakes are also being hunted. They are being hunted by what are known as nightmares. Nightmares are monsters of the Mad City. They run various things from the bureaucracy to the police force. I've heard that all doctors in the Mad City are nightmares. All of them want something out of you, whether it be you dead, whether it be you taking you inch by inch, or just even just torturing you until you break. They are the worst. They are like all terrifying things, usually representing something that is either like a common fear or, like I said in the Silent Hill analogy, they're sort of like how in Silent Hill every main character of those games has monsters specifically tailored to the problems that they have going on. In fact, that's probably the best way to do Don't Rest Your Head is if you're going to have players do it, you have to really know their character inside and out and make nightmares that are specifically tailored to the problems and fears that their character would have. Um, Now, setting wise, this is one of the coolest settings that I've come across in an RPG, and it's so terrifying and wonderful and interesting and awesome. Now, how is it for mechanics? Mechanics is really, really, it's really, really simple. I mean, the character sheet, in fact, has actually no number crunch involved in it. It's mostly a questionnaire. All you need to say is what your name is, basically what you generally sort of are, like maybe some sort of, like just a couple word phrase that could sum you up. Um, and then you just need to answer the questions. What's been keeping you awake? What just happened to you? What's on the surface? What lies beneath? What's your path? And then figure out your responses, your exhaustion tile, and your madness tile. Now, what do these mean? So, what's been keeping you awake? What is your problem? What is the problem that has it's so pervasive in your mind that it is keeping you up for nights and nights and nights and nights and nights and nights on end to the point where you don't even know how to sleep anymore. What just happened to you? This is probably one of the cooler parts of this system because as the player, you get to determine exactly what the opening scene of the game is going to be for your character. What just happened to you is literally just that. What just happened to you? What's the opening scene? The only stipulation has to be that it has to be a moment of high stress for your character, like the police breaking down your door, or your drug dealer just got killed in front of you, or you found him dead, or in front of you, or whatever, or
It's
maybe
funny
you
you
just
should
jumped
mention the
off a
drug
balcony
dealer.
or got into a car accident. It's got to be something that's like high stress situation that's really bad for your character. What's on the surface? How do people see your character? Who are you? Like, how do people perceive you? What lies beneath? What people do people not see about you? What do they not know? Um, and what's your path? What is your goal for the game? Like, your what are you working towards? Yeah, that's all you really need to answer, and it really helps you have a very fleshed out character by the end of character creation to really help the GM just sort of know what to do with your character. The other things are responses. You either have to assign basically three check boxes to fight or flight. Now, basically, this helps you determine if you're going to be more fighty, like more like aggressive, if you're going to be more cowardly. You could assign all three to one or the other, but it's definitely not recommended. The talents are the exhaustion talent, which is basically can be literally anything, as long as it's something mundane that your character just really knows how to do well, like maybe shooting a gun really well, or fighting, or running, or acrobatics. It could be lockpicking. It could be, you know, uh, sneaking. It's anything really. It's anything you want it to be, as long as it's mundane. And this is what your character is really good at. Um, Madness talent is literally you get a superpower. It pretty much can be anything you want, and there's really no restrictions on it. You just have to be able to really define what it does. I've seen examples from like teleportation to, seeing the future, to literally having ants crawling under your skin that help you out, to being able to summon a taxi cab that'll take you anywhere, to having lightning powers. I've seen one that's probably my favorite that's just called fuck, where basically if you give a descriptor to something with fuck in it, it'll make it that much more of whatever your descriptor was. Like, this car is so fucking fast. The car will just suddenly get a giant speed boost, and that's your madness. Like it's so it just be completely creative. Now, the only thing is now since apparently we're pressed for time, I'm just going to give us a quick sum up. Basically, this system is D6 pools. On a 1 to 3, it's a success. On a 4 to 6, it's not a success. You generate a pool from your discipline dice, of which you start with 3 and can lose them over the course of the game. Your exhaustion dice, which go up over the course of the game, which you don't want to happen. You simultaneously do and don't want to happen. And madness dice, which are governed by you, and you can throw as many in as you like. However, you don't want to go too overboard. Because the interesting thing about this is everything is opposed dice rolls. The GM says, okay, here's the difficulty. It's going to be this many dice that you have to oppose. And you roll your dice. The GM rolls their dice. Whoever gets more successes, if the player gets more successes, they succeed at whatever they were trying to do. If the GM gets more successes, then the player fails at what they were trying to do. Now, here's the tricky part, though. Whenever you're rolling these dice, you got to keep your exhaustion, discipline, and madness dice separate, because the way it works is the highest number from any of those pools, including the GM's dice, is what determines what is dominant. So if discipline is dominant, then that means that skill has won the day and nothing bad really happens, even if you fail. Like, you may have failed at whatever you're doing, but it doesn't get any worse than that. If exhaustion dice are dominant, meaning that the highest number that you rolled was from your exhaustion pool, then, well, it sucks to be you, because now you're a little bit more exhausted. You get 6 exhaustion. you pass out. And passing out is basically death, because then every single nightmare in the city knows exactly where you are and is coming after you, and you have to sleep because you're just so tired you can't keep going, and you're basically helpless and are most likely going to die or be tortured to death by nightmares. It's horrible. Don't do that. And last but not least, madness. If madness dice are dominant, then you go kind of crazy, and you gain one permanent madness dice. On top of that, if you gain two, you have on top of that you have to check off either a fight, one of your responses, your fight or flight, and it's your choice. But the problem is you have to react in that way. So like if you check off a flight, you are like just run until you can't stop running. You maybe like get paralyzed with fear, or maybe even just like scream as loud as you can, letting someone who is chasing you know exactly where you are. If you check off fight, you have to fight until whatever caused your madness is just dealt with and gone. So it is bad to have madness dominant. And if you check off all your responses, of which you only get 3, as I said, you snap. You go crazy. You reset all your permanent madness dice. You reset all your responses. But the fun part is you get to kind of like basically say, this is what this is what my madness power does, and you have free reign over what it does. You can be as ridiculous as you want. I remember one of my friends had blood as his madness power and just said, "I Iceman out of there on like a trail of blood. I just surf out on a trail of my own blood." It's like, well, that's crazy, man. That's awesome. Last but not least is pain is dominant, meaning that the GM's dice is dominant. No matter what happens, if pain is dominant, something bad happens to you. Pain is dominant. Even if you fail, then it's going to have some bite. If you succeed, you're still going to have something bad happen to you. It's not going to be pretty. So it adds this weird dichotomy of wanting to roll low for successes, but at the same time wanting to roll high for some dice just to make sure that pain isn't dominant or other things aren't dominant. So it adds this weird wanting to roll low and wanting to roll high at the same time, but in varying amounts, so that way you can succeed without bad things happening to you. The last mechanic that's in here is what's called hope and despair, which is basically every time pain is dominant, the GM gets 1 coin of this. You use coins. The GM gets 1 coin of despair. They can use this to add a 6 to any pool that they want, including pain. But if they add to pain, which can make any of those pools dominant on whatever roll you do. And if it's pain, they don't get another coin from doing that, but they can screw you over. Now, however, when he does use despair, he drops the coin into the hope bin for players. Now, they can use this to get automatic successes, make anything they want dominant. No, I don't think they can use this to get automatic successes, as well as if they use enough, they can restore discipline dice, and they can restore responses. So this is really, really, really nice to have. So all in all, it's a really solid system with an interesting amount of like dichotomy in rolling as well as dichotomy in GMing, because even if you're a nice GM, you want to punish your players as much as possible so that way they can have the chance to redeem themselves with hope. So it's all basically a system of dichotomies in every mechanic that all ends up into this really nice, interesting balance that works really well. The only downside I would say to this game is that it's probably there's about 2 ways of running it. One is with small groups, with them all split up most of the time, and really focusing in on personal character horror that really addresses what's wrong with the character and what the character has going on as well, and tackling those issues and trying to resolve them in various ways. The other way is you could do with bigger groups, but you're focusing less on the characters and more on the Mad City itself. I've seen a posting online for a game once that was basically the idea was bad things from outside of the Mad City that the nightmares are even fighting are invading the Mad City, and the Awake have to try to band together and try to figure out and deal with them and maybe even escape the Mad City. It was really interesting, and so that's definitely another way you could go if you want a bigger group and a little less GM heavy, a GM intensive game for Don't Rest Your Head. But otherwise, but yeah, this is a really solid system, really interesting world. Pretty cheap. It might be a little bit hard to find if you want a physical copy, but you can definitely find a digital copy on DriveThruRPG. Again, we'll put it in a link in the description for this video. John, Aaron, any thoughts on this?
Well, one thing that struck me immediately, I was YouTubing this to find out other campaigns, and almost every campaign had one guy who heard the junkie flavor text. They're just like, oh yeah, I fucking love cocaine. And so there's just people running around, and they're like, oh, my drug dealer's dead. I'm going to take 50 keys. If you've got 50 keys, you've got bigger problems than the nightmares. The Mexicans are after you at that point.
See, at that point, you can make nightmares who are basically like representative of Mexican
drug cartel.
Right, the people who did it well tied it into their madness. They're like, oh yeah, I'm going to go crazy while I'm on cocaine. Because like they know cocaine from a Rick James video. They never actually tried cocaine.
Oh gosh.
So they just try to get cocaine powers, and that's the best way to play it. If you're going to play a junkie, you got to commit.
Yeah, commit to it. Like, I really like it when people make madness powers that are flavored after what their problems are. Like, for example, like, I had an idea for a character who was basically just, like, a journalist who was, like, who was, like, really addicted to cigarettes, but his powers were smoke. So whenever he, like, whenever he used his madness powers, he could take a drag on a cigarette and then just blow this smoke into like doing what he wanted with it, like making maybe a smoke screen, or like even like twisting it into like a being at higher tiers of the power.
This reminds me of an anime I once saw, and I don't remember the name, but it had a concept in it called Euphoria, where like the kiss of this girl unlocked some pathogen inside of people's head, and it allowed them to do these insane shit. And this guy was a photographer, and he was also haunted because he went to photograph a war, so he saw all sorts of fucked up shit. And his power from that was being able to explode things that he took pictures of. And I feel like that kind of fits in with this.
That would totally fit in with this. Granted, I think he would have to be like, because the thing is, depending on how many madness dice you put into your roll, changes how powerful your madness power will be if you choose to use it for that roll. So I think exploding something by taking a picture would probably be like, depending on how bad you want it to be, would have to be like probably on the higher end of that, but still, yeah, that could totally fit in this universe and would be really interesting to play.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Stephen. I did not know about Don't Rest Your Head. I knew about Dread, but that was a fantastic intro to both of them. Thank you, and I cannot wait to hear more. Next week, we'll be covering Deadlands, I believe.
Deadlands, the Weird West. Deadlands Classic, not the Savage Worlds edition.
The classic one. All right. So, from all of us here at Table Knights Entertainment, this has been Stephen Knoll and John
Pruitt.
Pruitt. Okay.
My website launches next month. We'll keep up with it.
I'm going to call you John Pruitt now. All right. And remember, donate to Child's Play and roll on.